Good evening. It's Tuesday, August 25th. Firefighters make progress on the three major blazes ringing the San Francisco Bay Area as they get reinforcements from 9 other states and help from the weather.
So the past couple of days, we've seen significant progress in our firefight on this incident. The weather is really cooperating with us. We're steadily getting a trickle of resources in. As soon as we're getting those resources, we're putting them to work, putting them into our plan to achieve our strategy and tactics for this incident.
More than 500,000 people in Louisiana and Texas ordered to evacuate the Gulf Coast ahead of Hurricane Laura. Wisconsin Governor Tony Evers declares a state of emergency as protests continue against the shooting of an African-American man, Jacob Blake. Family attorney Benjamin Crump says the 29-year-old was shot in the back 7 times and may never walk again. Day 2 of the Republican National Convention from Charlotte, North Carolina, an auditorium near the Trump Hotel in downtown Washington, and tonight, the White House itself. It's the Trump Family Hour with Melania and Eric following Donald Jr. last night.
Joe Biden and the radical left are now coming for our freedom of speech. They want to bully us into submission.
And the head of the Food and Drug Administration backs off his extravagant claims on the benefits of convalescent plasma in treating the coronavirus, trumpeted by President Trump as a game changer and approved by the FDA as an emergency treatment without the normal regimen of testing. From Pacifica Radio, KPFA in Berkeley, KPFK in Los Angeles, this is the Evening News. I'm Mark Miracle. Firefighters are making progress in containing 3 major blazes around the San Francisco Bay Area as some evacuees begin returning home and state officials begin assessing the damage from what's shaping up as a brutal beginning to the fire season. KPFA's Christina Onestad reports.
Another day of cooler temperatures and mutual aid from 9 states are helping firefighters battle 3 large blazes circling the San Francisco Bay Area. The fires have destroyed at least 1,400 structures and killed 7 people. State officials warn fire season is far from over. Shauna Jones is the LNU unit chief with CAL FIRE, the State Department of Forestry and Fire Protection.
It is fire season, as you all know, but once this fire is done, we still have a very long time to go. We're in the middle of peak fire season. That means that you need to have a plan. You need to be prepared.
The LNU fires encompassing Lake, Napa, Solano, Sonoma, and Yolo counties is now the 14th most destructive fire in California history and has destroyed more than 900 homes. Some repopulation plans are in the works. Here's Sonoma County Sheriff Mark Essick.
We ask for your patience as we go through this repopulation stage and reentry stage. It is still a rapidly changing and progressing environment with the fire, and so we don't want to get hopes up and make promises we can't keep, and that is would be detrimental to the entire process. So please bear with us in your patience as we start to work with CAL FIRE to repopulate areas. As the damage assessment continues, it's important for everyone to realize that this is a time when some people will realize they no longer have homes, that they are going to be experiencing considerable losses. So it is always important, and we urge you to look out for your neighbors, care for your neighbors.
Residents in Solano County are already beginning to return home, some to no home at all. The LNU fire is now the 3rd largest fire in state history, having scorched nearly 353,000 acres. It's 27% contained. But the full scope of damage won't be known for some time, as authorities are just beginning to assess damages, says Daniel Berlant, a CAL FIRE public information officer.
Our damage assessment teams have been able to verify that 1,400 structures have been destroyed by these fires. In fact, the number of structures now destroyed in the LNU lightning complex, which is over 900, does put it as the 14th most destructive fire. So very destructive. Now, our preliminary assessments indicate that that number could rise in total to over 3,000 structures. So we are busy trying to get that information and provide that to the public. There is nothing more stressful for evacuees than to know whether or not their home was able to survive the wildfire, and we're trying to provide that information as quickly as possible.
CAL FIRE says all but 3 of the largest wildfires in California have occurred since 2000. 10 of them occurred in the last decade. To the east and South Bay, the SCU fire is now the largest of the 3 fires circling the Bay Area, and it's now the second largest fire in state history, burning more than 363,000 acres. It began from a series of lightning strikes that caused dozens of fires, but has now merged into one mega fire. It's 15% contained and has destroyed 5 structures. The fire has spread into 7 counties, including Alameda, Contra Costa, Merced, San Benito, Santa Clara, San Joaquin, and Stanislaus counties. Jake Hess, agency administrator and a CAL FIRE unit chief of the SCU complex, urges residents in the rural parts of these counties where the fires are burning to heed evacuation warnings.
Number one priority, and we've said this from day one, is life safety. That's public and firefighter life safety. We have been messaging out to our troops that trading a firefighter's life for a piece of brush or a tree, grass is an unacceptable situation. So let's talk a little bit about the evacuation process. The evacuation orders are in for 7 counties, essentially. We are being mindful of the impacts those are to the civilians. We will keep those orders and warnings in place no longer than we absolutely have to.
Further south, the CZU complex of fires in Santa Cruz and San Mateo counties has burned nearly 79,000 acres and destroyed some 330 structures. It still threatens some 25,000 homes, but firefighters say it's now 17% contained, and their fears of the fire spreading into Felton and other cities are waning. Officials say 6 aircraft dropped about 200,000 gallons of water on the fire yesterday. Authorities have lifted evacuation warnings for parts of Santa Clara County, where the fire was inching closer to. Mark Brunton, operations chief for CAL FIRE Incident Team 3, says they've made the fire line around the town of Felton. And the town of Davenport is now protected by fire lines and dozers, but Bonnie Doon still remains a challenge.
Bonnie Doon, again, continued challenge, lots of structures in there. A lot of heat still in some of the deep ravines and the drainages and so forth that we're starting to go after. Some of it we're letting burn out by design and monitoring that so that we don't put firefighters in harm's way into those deep, dangerous ravines, letting it burn into some more favorable territory and terrain that we can work on. Working around those structures still. We have a lot of resources up there, mop-up phase, so that we're taking care of those hot spots and among those homes.
Brunton says their strategy to fight the CZU fire is to just let the low-laying flames burn out. That's in many parts where there's no threat to homes. Nearly 170,000 people across the state have been evacuated from their homes. For many, it's unclear when they will be able to return. I'm Christina Onnested, reporting for KPFA.
As California moves into the heart of the fire season, CAL FIRE is asking residents to help their communities and themselves by being prepared. KPFA's Karen Argood reports.
In recent years, California wildfires have blazed nearly year-round. Leaders at CAL FIRE even suggest there's not a wildfire season at all anymore. More than ever before, residents are affected statewide by the fires. CAL FIRE spokesperson Will Powers says it's important to take action to protect their homes and their neighborhoods.
I've been to fires throughout the whole state of California, and one of the main things that I hear from residents who've been impacted by wildfire was, wow, I didn't think this could happen to me, and I didn't think this could come into my neighborhood. Everybody's at risk here in the state of California, as we've seen throughout the years. We've had major wildfires from the southern border to the northern border. So for Californians living in California, it's a great thing to do for homeowners if they're looking to get that defensible space kind of nailed down.
Powers says there are 3 key components of wildfire readiness. The first is maintaining an adequate defensible space by creating a buffer to keep the fire away from your home. This is done by removing dead plants, grass, and weeds.
It's kind of something for the residents to look and kind of realize, hey, maybe I need to trim that grass, or I need to get rid of that dead tree that's within my 100 feet of defensible space.
Secondly, use fire-resistant landscaping and surround your home with vegetation unlikely to catch fire. Finally, hardening your home by using construction materials that can help your home withstand flying embers and finding weak spots in the construction, which can result in your house catching fire.
Not only they're protecting their home, they are protecting their community, and they're educating themselves. So you might see, you might know about cutting your grass or, weed eating the dead shrubs or the dead grass behind your home. But there might be something in there that you're like, oh, I didn't realize that was something that we needed to do. And not only does defensible space protect your home, it protects your neighbor's home. Because defensible space is not only for fire coming to your home, but it's fire coming from your home and threatening to your communities. And a lot of times you just don't realize it until it's already in your neighborhood.
Powers encourages all residents to go to the CAL FIRE website and take the Defensible Space Survey. For Pacifica Radio, KPFA, I'm Karen Argood.
California's wildfires receive national and even international attention, but over the past years, the entire West and Southwest has suffered from catastrophic blazes because of the climate crisis. A project called This Place Will Burn has been designed to model the predicted increased frequency of large wildfires. Eric Tegetoff reports.
A new project is showing the West how much it will heat up as temperatures continue to rise. This Place Will Burn provides county-level predictions for the frequency of fires covering 12,000 acres or more. For Southwest Idaho, that could mean very large fires occurring more than once a year within the next 2 decades. John Leland is the creator of This Place Will Burn.
This isn't happening over a super long timeline. These are the frequencies that we're on track to get to by 2040, just in the next 20 years. So this is within most of our lifetimes that we're seeing this dramatic increase in the frequency of these large fires.
The project currently is in the Kickstarter phase to raise funds and spread the word about the West's hot future. Leland says the goal is to raise awareness and mobilize communities to take action on climate change. He says forest fires threaten the forests that make the Northwest special, and they also threaten communities. Leland points to the Camp Fire in Paradise, California, that killed more than 85 people.
The risk, not just to the sort of natural landscape, but to the community itself, is scary. And as more and more of these large wildfires in particular occur, it becomes harder and harder to fight them and rebuild from them.
Leland says communities at risk from large fires need to implement smart land management policies, such as controlled burns. But he hopes this project also can help push leaders toward change.
They can use that information to then pressure their elected representatives, mobilize people within their community to band together and push for the kind of changes that are needed to address these sorts of issues.
For Public News Service, I'm Eric Tegetoff.
Hundreds of thousands of people have been ordered to evacuate the Texas and Louisiana coasts ahead of Hurricane Laura. Forecasters expect Laura to grow to a major Category 3 hurricane over the warm waters of the Gulf of Mexico before hitting the U.S. coastline late tomorrow or early Thursday. The National Hurricane Center is warning of potentially devastating damage. Texas Governor Greg Abbott told Texans they could expect high winds very far inland and a large storm surge.
This will be a fast-moving storm, or at least it's slated to be, meaning that after it comes ashore, we expect it to be out of the state of Texas after about a day. So we are anticipating that the storm itself will be out of Texas perhaps as early as the end of Thursday. That said, there will be a lot of devastation wreaked upon Texas as the storm sweeps through, especially East Texas, as well as lingering challenges that will result. One and first will be the water surge.
Scientists predict up to 13 feet of storm surge, which could inundate the coastline from High Island in Texas to Morgan City, Louisiana. Ocean water was expected to push onto land along more than 450 miles of coast from Texas to Mississippi. Higher sea surface temperatures are one of the products of climate change that makes hurricanes more intense and more deadly. Laura already has killed 24 people in Haiti and the Dominican Republic. Last week, Louisiana's governor signed an executive order setting a state goal for net zero carbon emissions by 2050. Environmental groups were quick to praise him. Natalie Snyder of the Environmental Defense Fund said it's unique for a state driven by fossil fuel. Governor John Bel Edwards laid out Louisiana's first goal for greenhouse gases in an order creating a climate initiative task force. It will include members from state government, business, a tribal representative, academics, and other areas. A second order creates a state resilience officer and directs all state agencies to work with that person. You're listening to the Evening News on KPFA Berkeley, KPFK Los Angeles, KFCF Fresno, online at kpfa.org. Jacob Blake, the black man shot multiple times by police in Wisconsin, is paralyzed, and it would take a miracle for him to walk again. That's what his family's attorney said today, while calling for the officer who opened fire to be arrested and others involved to lose their jobs. The shooting of Blake on Sunday in Kenosha, Wisconsin, apparently in the back while 3 of his children looked on, was captured on cell phone video and ignited new protests over racial injustice in several cities, some of which have devolved into property destruction. It came just 3 months after the death of George Floyd at the hands of Minneapolis police, touched off a wider reckoning on racism in America. William Denislow reports.
Speaking to the Chicago Sun-Times, Jacob Blake's father said there were 8 holes in his son's body and that it's unclear if the paralysis from the waist down is permanent. Civil rights attorney Ben Crump, who's representing the Blake family, told ABC News Jacob will require further operations. Video of the incident shows Blake, a 29-year-old black man, walking towards a car door with 2 officers pointing guns at his back. A number of gunshots are heard when he opens the car door, with an officer tugging at Blake's shirt. It's unclear if the officers saw anything in the car, and the shooting is under investigation. The incident has triggered several nights of protests between demonstrators and police in riot gear. William Danslow, New York.
The Blake's family's legal team plans to file a civil lawsuit against the police department over the shooting. Police have said little about what happened other than that they were responding to a domestic dispute. The officers involved have not been named. The Wisconsin Department of Justice is investigating. Blake's father, who is also named Jacob Blake, spoke to reporters alongside other family members and lawyers.
They shot my son 7 times. 7 times. Like he didn't matter. But my son matters. He's a human being, and he matters.
Attorney Ben Crump said the 29-year-old Jacob Blake was in surgery, adding that the bullets severed Blake's spinal cord and shattered his vertebrae.
Until we have transparency plus accountability, we can never bridge this divide of mistrust between communities of color and law enforcement. To say that Jacob Blake life matters, to say that Trayford Pellerin, who was killed just 48 hours earlier in Lafayette, Louisiana. And so the message is, thank you for standing with these families who have been devastated and need a voice right now more than ever.
Crump said 3 of the younger Blake's sons, aged 3, 5, and 8, were in the car at the time of the shooting. He added it was the 8-year-old's birthday. The man who said he made the cell phone video of the shooting, 22-year-old Rayshawn White, said he saw Blake scuffling with the three officers and heard them yell, drop the knife, before the gunfire erupted. White said he did not see a knife in Blake's hands. In the footage, Blake walks from the sidewalk around the front of his SUV to his driver's side door as officers follow him with their guns drawn and shout at him. As Blake opens the door and leans into the SUV, an officer grabs his shirt from behind and opens fire. 7 shots can be heard, although it isn't clear how many struck Blake or how many officers fired. Anger over the shooting spilled into the streets of Kenosha and other cities, including Los Angeles, Wisconsin's capital of Madison, and in Minneapolis, the epicenter of the Black Lives Matter movement this summer following George Floyd's death. Hundreds of protesters defied an 8 p.m. curfew last night, massing in downtown Kenosha, where they were met by a wall of law enforcement officers, including members of the Wisconsin National Guard. Some clashed with officers and vandalized businesses. The fire department said there were 34 fires associated with the unrest, with 30 businesses destroyed or damaged, along with an unknown number of residences. Reporter Mike Moen has more.
Protesters continue to demand justice over the police shooting of a black man in Kenosha over the weekend. And Democrats in the legislature say the incident underscores the need for immediate action on police accountability measures. Groups such as Black Lives Matter and other activists say the Kenosha police officers who shot Jacob Blake multiple times in the back should be charged. Police fired their weapons when Blake tried to enter his vehicle while walking away from them during a domestic disturbance call. State Representative Christine Sinicki says while the investigation still needs to play out, it's clear from witness videos that type of force was unnecessary.
We need training as to how to de-escalate a situation before it ends up into becoming something like this.
Sinicki and Governor Tony Evers, a fellow Democrat, want lawmakers in special session to consider a package that, among other things, would mandate annual training on use of force and de-escalation techniques. Republicans would rather form a task force to study these issues, along with racial disparities. Blake is expected to survive the incident, and the officers involved now are on leave. Republicans add that it's too soon to take action when little is known about an incident creating a lot of emotion. But Democrats say the task force approach would take too long at a time when many people are demanding an immediate response, especially in light of the police killing of George Floyd in Minneapolis back in May. Sinicki says there's no time for stalling.
This is just, to me, unfathomable that we have gone through this summer and not address these issues.
Other Democrats say a lot of these issues have been studied before and that the struggles black residents have faced are well documented. Evers has called several special sessions since taking office, but Republicans have largely ignored taking up any proposals when called back to Madison. Mike Moen, Public News Service.
Police are investigating after demonstrators marching from Milwaukee to Washington, D.C. in response to the police killing of George Floyd were shot at in Pennsylvania, wounding one person. The shooting happened around midnight last night. The wounded person was brought to a hospital in Johnstown, Pennsylvania, with injuries that appeared minor. Pennsylvania State Police said 2 people were being questioned. In a video posted this morning to Facebook, Marcher Tory Lowe said the group had parked to organize before they were walking up an incline when a man emerged from a house and started shooting at them with a rifle, firing at least 7 shots. California Assemblywoman Lorena Gonzalez has proposed AB 66, a bill that would prevent police in the state from using so-called non-lethal weapons against protesters. The bill will also ban the use of tear gas for crowd control. KPFA's Daniel Whitty reports.
AB 66 would ban police from using non-lethal weapons such as rubber bullets, pepper spray, and bean bags to force a crowd to disperse. Instead, they would be required to use de-escalation methods, which could include asking people to break up or warning of the imminent use of these weapons so that those who are not involved can get out of the way. This bill would be the first to establish standards for the use of non-lethal weapons. As of now, there are no standards. It would require that a situation be threatening to people in the crowd or to police officers. Gonzalez explains some of the misuses that now occur with these weapons.
And so as a result, some of these weapons were used in a way that even the manufacturer had suggested were not appropriate. Fired indiscriminately in crowds, things like rubber bullets or beanbags. We had tear gas and pepper spray used massively just because people had violated a curfew or they wanted people to disperse. And so we set out to create a bill that would have clear standards for the use of these weapons in the future.
Despite their name, non-lethal weapons have caused many injuries. Leslie Furcron, a black woman from San Diego, describes her experience with these weapons while at a protest back in May.
I was only at the protest for about 7 minutes before I was shot in the head with the beanbag round. I want to make sure people understand that was not a beanbag like the kind that kids play with. This was a small bag of fabric filled with lead pellets fired out of a shotgun. I will never forget the pain in my head. It felt like I was on fire. I was bleeding, laying on the ground, and the round was lodged in my forehead. I thank God every day for the kind people who were out there protesting next to me. They helped me up and they drove me to the hospital. I would have died without them. When I got to the hospital, they said the swelling in my brain was so bad that they had to put me in an induced coma.
Furcron goes on to say that she believes people shouldn't be injured with these weapons when they are only exercising their legal right to protest. She says that weapons like the beanbags that she was shot with should be taken seriously, which is why she supports AB 66. Senator Lena Gonzalez from Long Beach explains why it is important for people to be able to protest peacefully.
And so what's really important for us is to continue to allow our residents to peacefully protest. We cannot defend these tactics. Quite frankly, they're warfare tactics. And they have been alluded to a lot of police brutality that we've seen in a lot of our regions. We've seen that police are often not even complying with their own policies locally. And coming from a city that I absolutely adore, I've seen this in two different examples that we've seen on Twitter and all over social media. First with Marisa Baltazar, who actually lost her finger, as many of you know. She was in Long Beach just peacefully protesting and lost her finger. We also have Mr. Guzman Lopez, who was an LAist KPCC reporter who was struck directly in the neck as well.
Although non-lethal weapons have been deemed non-lethal by police, they are sometimes deadly and always dangerous. The Senate is expected to vote on the bill this week. For KPFA News, I'm Daniel Whitty.
You are listening to the evening news on KPFA Berkeley, KPFK Los Angeles, KFCF Fresno, online, kpfa.org. It's an hour-long newscast, airs each night at 6 with a half-hour edition on the weekends. And it's always available online at kpfa.org. It's archived there. I'm Mark Miracle.
Hi, this is Mitch Jeserich, inviting you to join us on this radio station for Pacifica's live coverage of the Republican National Convention, starting Monday, August 24th, and going through Thursday, August 27th, starting each night at 7 p.m. on the West Coast and 10 p.m. on the East. We'll have the main speeches, we'll talk to progressives, and yes, we'll talk to conservatives too, and we'll be taking your calls. So join us for Pacifica Radio's coverage of the Republican National Convention.
First Lady Melania Trump is set to give tonight's keynote address to the Republican National Convention from the Rose Garden of the White House. Stephanie Grisham is Melania Trump's chief of staff.
Her speech will be definitely very uplifting and positive. It will be one of her longer speeches that she's given, and I think the American people will be really excited to hear some of the things that she's going to say.
Secretary of State Mike Pompeo is also set to speak tonight. It's unusual for a Secretary of State to take part in such a partisan event as this. An aide to Democratic presidential nominee Joe Biden, who's worked at the State Department, calls Pompeo's speech flat out disgraceful. The Biden aide, Bill Russo, also says it's an abuse of taxpayer money. Another top Biden deputy blasted Pompeo as President Trump's errand boy and says he has a record of repeated and blatant use of his office for overtly political purposes. New Jersey Senator Cory Booker, member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, says Pompeo's plan to speak violates his own policy. Booker was referring to Pompeo's memos and instructions sent recently to his department's employees. President Trump is expected to make an appearance tonight. Yesterday, Trump said the only way Democrats could win the presidential election was that if it were rigged. Last night, presidential son, Donald Trump Jr., was among those warning about a dire future should Joe Biden win the presidency.
Joe Biden and the radical left are now coming for our freedom of speech. They want to bully us into submission. If they get their way, it will no longer be the silent majority. It will be the silenced majority.
The First Lady tonight will be speaking from the renovated Rose Garden, despite questions about using the White House for a political convention. The Federal Hatch Act prohibits the use of a government building for campaigning, although the Office of Special Counsel wrote last week that the grounds of the White House are not considered a government building for the purposes of the law. Still, Melania Trump's appearance and Trump's acceptance speech Thursday night have raised concerns from ethics groups that Trump is violating the spirit of the law, if not the letter. Tonight's program will include pointed attacks against Biden, whom convention speakers the night before assailed as a puppet of his party's far left wing, who would destroy the American dream. More from reporter Lily Volke, who filed this report.
Alabama has unanimously cast its 50 delegates' votes for President Donald J. Trump.
Rhode Island proudly stands united to cast our 19 votes for President Donald J. Trump.
336 delegates, about 13% of the usual number, officially renominated President Donald Trump in person in Charlotte, North Carolina, the first morning of the Republican National Convention. The president and vice president both made surprise appearances at the roll call.
If you want to really drive him crazy, you say 12 more years.
Trump continued his attack on mail-in voting despite its historical success and falsely claimed that Democrats are, quote, using COVID to steal the election, unquote. One of the presidential primary challengers, Tea Party conservative and former Illinois Congressman Joe Walsh, disagrees with Trump.
The most frightening and ugly and un-American thing he's ever done, undermining the legitimacy of an election.
Walsh is also critical of the GOP's decision to reuse their 2016 party platform.
Not a surprise. The party platform is all about Trump. The speakers are Trump. Trump's going to speak all the time.
The evening featured Donald Trump Jr., former UN Ambassador Nikki Haley, and other Trump allies. Speakers railed against Democrats, commended the president's response to COVID-19, and took credit for the pre-COVID economy. While others praised Trump for being tough on crime, the lone black Republican Senator Tim Scott attacked former Vice President Joe Biden for being too tough on crime in the past.
In 1994, Biden led the charge on a crime bill that put millions of black Americans behind bars.
Multiple speakers falsely claimed Biden wants to defund the police. Biden, in fact, wants to increase funding for more police training. Biden called for an immediate investigation into Sunday's police shooting of Jacob Blake, an unarmed black man now hospitalized in stable condition in Kenosha, Wisconsin. For Pacifica Network and Public News Service, I'm Lily Bolke.
And once again, Pacifica's Radio's coverage of the Republican National Convention resumes at 7 o'clock tonight, immediately following this newscast. Amid concern that foreign governments would interfere in the 2020 general election, a new survey finds state voter registration databases are more secure than they were in 2018 for the congressional elections then. Nadia Ramlagan reports.
Almost twice as many states now require multi-factor authentication and passwords that are at least 8 characters long, and nearly all states are monitoring voter registration database login attempts. Executive Director of the Center for Election Innovation and Research, David Becker, says voter registration databases drive almost every aspect of elections.
Whenever someone wants to vote by mail, that information is checked against their voter file, their voter registration record. When someone goes to check in at a polling place, they are checked against their voter registration record. If someone receives information about upcoming elections, that's all based on the voter registration record.
Arkansas first instituted a statewide voter registration system in the mid-1990s that relied on county clerks to maintain and update voter information. After Congress passed the Help America Vote Act in 2002, the state moved to a more secure, centralized system controlled by the Secretary of State's office. According to a June 2020 report from the Secretary of State, there are currently more than 1.7 million registered voters in Arkansas. Becker says the U.S. Department of Homeland Security has evidence Russia briefly infiltrated Illinois' state voter registration database in 2016.
A bad actor wanted to change data, delete people's records or change their records, it could really impact their ability to successfully vote. So you also have to have the ability to detect an intrusion and detect it quickly so you can shut it down, as happened in 2016 with the Illinois database.
He adds after the incident, many states began backing up their databases on a daily basis and training election officials on how to identify cyber threats.
And fortunately, we've seen the trend in 2020 continue towards more and more security. More and more states have much better security around using multi-factor authentication and better passwords, for instance. More states are checking the activity that's occurring in their voter registration database to see if anything looks like it's not quite right.
To maintain cybersecurity, the survey does not disclose specific state responses, but notes that some states reported not monitoring or auditing their voter registration database input forms. At least 6 states said they do not use multi-factor authentication to restrict access. For Public News Service, I'm Nadia Ramlagan.
San Francisco joined a lawsuit filed today challenging the Trump administration's changes to the U.S. Postal Service, arguing the changes have dramatically delayed operations, putting lives at risk and moving forward with the president's push to curtail mail-in voting in November. A coalition of 3 states, Hawaii, New Jersey, and New York, and the cities of New York and San Francisco filed the suit, which argues changes impede the Postal Service's ability to carry out its mission. Those changes include removing mailboxes and mail sorting machines, curtailing overtime, and prohibiting late and extra trips that ensure mail is delivered on a timely and consistent basis, and creating confusion regarding what election mail delivery standards the USPS will follow in advance of the November general election. Postal Service workers all over the country are expressing concerns about the cuts and other changes in operations that are resulting in significant delays in mail delivery. The postal workers on the front lines are fielding the complaints from customers hurt by the delays in delivery of their prescription drugs and other forms of service cuts, but they say they're helpless to do anything about it. Tramel Gomes has the story.
Unions representing postal workers in Florida are calling for the Postmaster General to permanently reverse changes that have created major mail delays. They are also calling on Congress to support the agency the same way it supports corporations. Wanda Harris is president of Miami Area Local 172 of the American Postal Workers Union. She says she is heartbroken as they are flooded with complaints from customers. She says she tries to explain that the changes are beyond her control, but it doesn't stop the cries from veterans and small business owners who are left in limbo.
The elderly can't even get their checks on time. They are on a fixed income. They are so used to the first and the third and the fifth. Now they got to wait on their checks. That's enough to make them feel as though their life is over. That is not fair.
Postmaster General Louis DeJoy announced he would reverse the reduction of staff and post office hours, along with removing postal boxes until after November's election. On Saturday, the U.S. House passed the Delivering for America Act, which provides $25 billion in additional funding for the agency and bans the recent changes DeJoy implemented. The bill now moves to the Republican-led Senate. Al Friedman with the Florida State Association of Letter Carriers says for too long the nation's most trusted agency has been overlooked for suffering the same problems of businesses and corporations impacted by things like the pandemic.
Why did we give a stimulus package to American Airlines, Delta, United, Southwest? Because of lost revenue and trying to keep their employees employed, correct? And how different is that than the Postal Service? We're losing about $3 to $4 million a day because of all the forced overtime.
Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell told reporters that the Senate is unlikely to pass a bill that only addresses the Postal Service. Instead, Senate Republicans plan to introduce a skinny coronavirus stimulus package that could include $10 billion allocating for the USPS and $300 in weekly unemployment benefits. Union workers say that's not enough for a long-term solution and restoring calm to an agency once known for being reliable. For Public News Service, I'm Tremel Gomes.
Food and Drug Administration Chief Stephen Hahn is admitting he overstated the potential life-saving benefits of convalescent plasma when he announced the FDA was granting emergency authorization for its use as a treatment for COVID-19. The treatment takes blood plasma from people who've recovered from COVID-19 and gives the antibodies to those suffering from the disease. President Trump announced the treatment on the eve of the Republican National Convention after criticizing the FDA for not moving fast enough. Trump claimed there's a deep state in the agency actively opposing his reelection. The FDA chief says in a tweet last night, quote, "I have been criticized for remarks I made Sunday night about the benefits of convalescent plasma. The criticism is entirely justified. What I should have said better is that the data show a relative risk reduction, not an absolute risk reduction." Outside scientists were highly critical of the FDA for not conducting double-blind and controlled studies and said Hahn misrepresented the benefits of the treatment. Hahn had echoed Trump in saying that 35 more people out of 100 would survive the coronavirus if they were treated with the plasma. That claim vastly overstated preliminary findings of clinical observations. The number of Americans newly diagnosed with the coronavirus is falling. A development experts say most likely reflects more mask wearing among the public, but also insufficient testing, even as the disease continues to claim nearly 1,000 American lives each day. According to data compiled by Johns Hopkins University, about 43,000 new cases are being reported daily across the country. That's down 21% from early August. The U.S. remains number one in infection number, with more than 5.9 million confirmed infections and more than 182,000 deaths. The world now has more than 24 million confirmed coronavirus infections and more than 821,000 dead. Los Angeles Mayor Eric Garcetti says he's authorized shutting off utility services at a home in the Hollywood Hills that's been the site of raucous parties, despite a ban on large gatherings during the coronavirus pandemic. Garcetti says the house has turned into a nightclub in the hills. The city did not identify the home's address or the owner. Garcetti announced earlier this month that he would ask the city's Department of Water and Power to shut off services to houses and businesses hosting parties. He said with bars closed down in town, large house parties can become super spreaders of COVID-19. The announcement came days after an August 3rd party at a mansion where hundreds of people gathered without masks or social distancing. The party ended in a shooting that killed a woman and wounded 2 other people. AstraZeneca has started clinical trials for a drug aimed at treating COVID-19. The pharmaceutical company is conducting separate trials of a vaccine. Benji Heyer reports on the drug trial.
The drug, known as AZD7442, is a combination of 2 antibodies, and the first volunteers are already receiving doses. AstraZeneca says the trial, which will include up to 48 healthy volunteers in the UK, will be focused on 3 things: safety, the body's reaction to the drug, and how it processes it. This is an important milestone in the development of the drug, according to Executive Vice President of Pharmaceuticals Research and Development at Astra. It has the potential to act as a preventative for people exposed to the virus, as well as to treat patients already infected with COVID-19. Earlier in the week, AstraZeneca told the White House it will not take shortcuts in safety trials of the vaccine developed by Oxford University after President Trump considered bypassing normal regulatory channels to have the jab ready in the US in time for the election. Benji Heyer, London.
You're listening to the Evening News. KPFA Berkeley, KPFK Los Angeles, KFCF Fresno, online at kpfa.org.
Hey everyone, this is Brian Edwards-Teekert.
And I'm Kat Brooks.
Weekday mornings we host Upfront.
2 hours of conversation about what's in the news and what should be.
Politics, technology.
Prisons, police.
What's happening in City Hall and at the State House.
In Washington and in the streets.
That's starting at 7 a.m., right after Democracy Now!
On Upfront.
A Florida judge temporarily blocked Republican Governor Ron DeSantis and top education officials from forcing public schools to reopen for in-person instruction amid the ongoing coronavirus pandemic. The county judge ruled that the Florida state order arbitrarily disregards safety. Judge Charles Dodson also said that the mandate took away the authority of local controlled school districts to decide for themselves whether it was safe for students, teachers, and staffers to return. The Florida Education Association had sued the state after the state education commissioner issued an order earlier this summer mandating that schools reopen classrooms by August 31st or risk losing funding. The state immediately appealed the judge's ruling. Syracuse University suspended 23 students in the wake of a large on-campus gathering that administrators say could force them to shut down the whole campus. College officials say they are reviewing security camera footage and fielding tips to identify additional students seen on video crowding into the campus quad last week. Such gatherings are banned to control the spread of the coronavirus. Several colleges have struggled with the decision to bring back students, only to reverse course and move classes online amid outbreaks of the virus, linked in some cases to student housing and parties. South Korea is undergoing a resurgence of coronavirus cases. The country countered its 11th straight day of triple-digit daily jumps in cases after social distancing restrictions were tightened nationwide. Health officials say huge infection numbers are likely to be reported in coming days as health workers scramble to trace and test contacts of virus carriers. Future Story News' Bruce Harrison reports from Seoul, South Korea.
South Korea is responding to the surge in cases with tougher health regulations nationwide. Several hundred cases have been reported daily over the past 10 days. A new nationwide ban on large gatherings has forced churches, nightclubs, and beaches from operating. Fans have also been banned from attending sports events after they were allowed to return last month at limited capacity. Masks are now required in all public spaces except when eating or drinking. South Korea has now more than 17,600 cases, roughly 2,000 from just the past week and a half. Bruce Harrison, Seoul.
Advocates trying to drive down the cost of health care in California are pressing state lawmakers to consider a bill to regulate for-profit health care mergers before the end of the legislative session this coming Monday. Suzanne Potter has the story.
SB 977 would give Attorney General Javier Becerra the power to review or reject mergers of for-profit health systems, the same way he does now for nonprofit deals. Anthony Wright, with the consumer advocacy group Health Access, says mega mergers are a big reason why the healthcare costs are so high, especially in the northern half of the Golden State.
A study by UC Berkeley suggests that inpatient rates in Northern California were 79% higher than in Southern California for the same procedures, and that was largely because of the consolidation in this region.
Groups representing hospitals and doctors oppose the bill, saying it gives the state too much power to interfere in private contracts. The bill also would give the AG more tools to pursue hospital chains for anti-competitive practices. Wright contends that mergers have given some large healthcare systems a near monopoly in certain counties and thinks the public interest, not profit, needs to be paramount.
If we're going to have this consolidation and transformation of our healthcare system, we want there to be public oversight and not have these deals only be considered in private boardrooms.
SB 977 already has been approved by the state Senate and needs a full vote of the Assembly to advance to the governor's desk. For Public News Service, I'm Suzanne Potter.
Health authorities today declared the African continent free of the wild polio virus after decades of effort. Although cases of vaccine-derived polio are still sparking outbreaks of the paralyzing disease in more than a dozen countries. The declaration leaves Pakistan and neighboring Afghanistan as the only countries thought to still have the wild polio virus, with vaccination efforts against the highly infectious waterborne disease complicated by insecurity and attacks on healthcare workers. The announcement by the African Regional Certification Commission for Polio Eradication comes after no cases were reported for 40 years. Polio once paralyzed some 75,000 children a year across Africa. Philly Hazia reports from Abuja, Nigeria.
The certification of the milestone announced during the World Health Organization video conference on Tuesday means all 47 countries within its African region have eradicated the viral disease that can cause irreversible paralysis. More than 95% of Africa's population has now been immunized. This was one of the conditions that the Africa Regional Certification Commission set before declaring the continent free from wild polio. The last case in Africa was recorded 4 years ago in northeast Nigeria. The West African country is the last in the region to be declared free from wild polio, having accounted for more than half of all global cases less than a decade ago.
Reporter Phil Ihaza in Abuja. The Kremlin today brushed off allegations that Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny was the victim of an international poisoning orchestrated by authorities and said there were no grounds for a criminal investigation so far, since it hasn't been fully established what caused the politician to fall into a coma. The Russian government's insistence that Navalny wasn't necessarily the victim of a deliberate poisoning amplifies comments coming from Russian doctors and pro-Kremlin media. It comes a day after doctors in Germany, where the 44-year-old is being treated, said tests indicated he was poisoned. Simon Marks reports.
Now that German doctors have said they do think he was poisoned in Siberia last week. They're treating him in a German hospital now with drugs usually used to fight the impact of nerve agents and pesticides on the human body. So who might have been behind the attempt to kill him? Ben Noble is a lecturer in Russian politics at University College London.
Navalny has lots of enemies. It's not as if we can automatically say that it was Putin, but increasingly the burden of proof appears to be shifting regarding the Kremlin's role, given the specifics of this particular case, when we look at what the doctors did or didn't do in Omsk in the early treatment of Navalny, the presence of unknown security personnel within the hospital, their treatment of his wife, not allowing her to visit him, but then also some things that we know about the FSB, so that's the Federal Security Service in Russia, the successor to the KGB, it turns out that they were tracking Navalny incredibly closely in Tomsk in Siberia before he was poisoned. And so increasingly, I think the Kremlin has to answer, what their story is for this particular incident.
German Chancellor Angela Merkel is demanding that the Kremlin conduct an open investigation into Mr. Navalny's poisoning. The Kremlin has denied having anything to do with it and also contests the claim that he was attacked with some kind of nerve agent. With FSN Spotlight, I'm Simon Marks.
Authorities in Belarus steadily cranked up the pressure on protesters pushing for the resignation of the country's authoritarian leader, President Alexander Lukashenko. Courts in Minsk handed 10-day sentences to two members of a council that opposition activists established last week to negotiate a transition of power following Lukashenko's winning a sixth term in an election that critics contended was rigged. Lukashenko has firmly rejected offers of dialogue from the Coordination Council. A former culture minister and diplomat who joined the opposition council was summoned for questioning over his role in the opposition party. Belarus's most famous writer, Svetlana Alexievich, who won the 2015 Nobel Prize in Literature, also received a summons after joining the council. The bodies of two other opposition supporters also were found hung in forests. Police declared that the deaths were suicide, but the opposition has contested that claim. A harsh police crackdown has fueled public anger, helping swell the number of protesters that reached an unprecedented peak of about 200,000 for 2 consecutive Sundays. As the authorities toughened their stance, Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, the main opposition challenger in the August 9th election, reaffirmed her push for a new presidential election in a speech to the European Union delivered via video link from the capital of Lithuania, where she's taken refuge.
The demand of Belarusians is simple: a free and fair election. This is the demand of the protesters on the streets. This is the slogan of the people on strike in numerous factories across the country. Belarus has woken up. We are not the opposition anymore. We are the majority now.
Belarus's Supreme Court today rejected the appeal to annul the results of the presidential vote. As Grand Teton National Park prepares to cull mountain goats to protect bighorn sheep populations from disease, conservationists are sounding the alarm about the potential harm to endangered grizzly bears if hunters are sent in to do the job. Eric Galatis reports.
Kristen Combs with Wyoming Wildlife Advocates recently sent a letter urging park officials to think twice before sending hunters deep into undisturbed bear country as bears are out feasting before hibernation.
It just seems like the chance for an encounter with bears is pretty high here, and so we're concerned that some bears might be injured or even killed during this process, and just want to make sure that the park is doing everything possible in their power to reduce the risk.
Wyoming Game and Fish condemned the park's initial plans to cull goats using aerial sharpshooters, arguing the move would waste meat. The agency also said not tapping hunters to harvest goats would set a dangerous precedent. Grand Teton National Park officials say hunting will not put grizzlies at risk, noting that the conservation of native species is a priority of the National Park Service. If hunting does go forward, Combs says it's important that volunteers travel in groups of 3 or more to better alert bears and avoid conflict. She points to studies showing that bear spray is far more effective than bullets in preventing injury or death to bears and people.
Making sure that every single skilled volunteer that's out there has bear spray. If any bears are suspected to be in the area, they need to have that bear spray out and ready rather than their gun in their hand.
Mountain goats are not historical residents of Grand Teton National Park. They likely migrated there after being reintroduced in the Snake River Range in the 1970s. The park's last remaining bighorn sheep are currently healthy, but they are highly susceptible to contracting diseases from mountain goats that scientists fear could wipe out the herd. For Public News Service, I'm Eric Galatis.
As the fires ringing the Bay Area continue to burn, air quality officials today extended the Spare the Air alert through Friday. It had been expiring tomorrow. Mostly sunny tomorrow in the San Francisco Bay Area with highs in the upper 60s around the Bay. Sunny further inland with highs in the upper 80s. Sunny with highs in the upper 90s in the Central Valley tomorrow.
This is a community announcement for August 2020. Help is always available on San Francisco Suicide Prevention's crisis hotline at 415-781-0500. The National Suicide Prevention Lifeline is 1-800-273-8255. For more information, visit sfsuicide.org or suicidepreventionlifeline.org. This COVID Coping Community Calendar is produced by the First Voice Apprenticeship Program. Please send your listing for consideration to KPFA at 1929 Martin Luther King Jr. Way, Berkeley 94704, or email calendar@kpfa.org. To hear this calendar again, call 510-848-6767 extension 621, or view it online at kpfa.org.